Calvin Cheney. I'm a senior systems analyst at Tableau. Today I'm going to tell you a story about how we migrated one of our Tableau Server deployments to Tableau Online. And how one of the common misconceptions about deploying Tableau is that if the majority of your data is on-prem, that Tableau Server is the default option, and that Tableau Online is only for connecting to cloud data. Well, today I'm going to tell you about how, even though our deployment uses majority of on-premises data, how you can still use Tableau Online even if your data is not in the cloud. And then hopefully the information I give you today will show you how easily you can spin up a Tableau Online site and connect to your on-premises data with no complicated setup or firewall rules. So I originally started at Tableau as a technical support engineer supporting our Tableau Server product. I did that for about a year and a half and got to know Tableau Server pretty well. And then I switched to my current role as a server admin for our internal Tableau deployments. And I've been doing that for about 3 years. I'm a member of our enterprise analytics team. And the mission of our team is to enable and champion data stewards and analysts throughout the company and provide the tools that they need so that they own the context and quality of the data, rather than we provide the tools and mechanisms necessary so that to enable self-service whenever possible, rather than owning the data sources ourselves. So about 2 years ago, our VP of Operations and Platforms in our dev team asked if we could start using instead of Tableau Server for our that our dev team uses, to start using Tableau Online instead. So this was going to be a pretty big project, and so it made more sense at the time. Our operations team, which I was on, and our development team were in 2 separate buildings. And so since it was going to be such a big project, it made sense for me to move and be embedded with the dev team, since I was going to be working with them a lot. And so when I moved offices, my colleague Matt, who I used to share an office with, put this sign on the door saying that I had moved to the cloud. So today I'm going to talk about authentication and user provisioning. This is one of the more challenging aspects when switching from on-prem to a SaaS service. Connecting to your on-premises data with Tableau Bridge, and the tips and tricks for connecting to cloud data. And then considerations where you still may need to use Tableau Server, and how you can also deploy it in the cloud rather than your own hardware. So let's dive into authentication and user provisioning. So obviously this is one of the more challenging aspects, because in on-prem, it's pretty easy to just sync your Active Directory or LDAP users it's easy to sync your users from your LDAP or Active Directory identity stores. And then users just authenticate using their domain credentials. Well, with a SaaS service, that's not necessarily an option, since it's not part of your domain. How many organizations have an identity provider set up? Like Okta, OneLogin? Yeah, it's quite a few. So Tableau Online makes it fairly easy to set up authentication if you already have an identity provider. SAML is the most common. Setting up SAML is fairly easy. You basically just exchange metadata XMLs between Tableau Online and your identity provider. Tableau Online also supports OpenID. So if anyone use Google G Suite Enterprise, like Google Docs and stuff. So if you use Google OpenID, it's really simple to use that for signing into Tableau Online as well. You can basically, it just brings up the same Google authentication dialog, just like you would when you're signing into any of your Google apps. The default authentication type for Tableau Online is Tableau ID. This is essentially the identity provider that is used for multiple Tableau resources, including our customer support portal, community forums, e-learning platform, and there's no setup or configuration if you decide to use this for Tableau Online. It's just simple email address and password. And later when I talk about Bridge, I'll tell you why it's important to still have a Tableau ID account, or keep this in mind. Tableau Server, obviously you can, like I mentioned, you can sync with Active Directory or LDAP identity stores. You can also set up SAML at the server level, or if you manage multiple sites and have multiple IDPs, you can set it up at the site level as well. And then obviously there's still basic username and passwords, where the credentials are just stored within the Tableau Server repository. So with provisioning users, at the basic level, it's just a matter of adding a list of usernames or email addresses. At Tableau, we, with both our internal Tableau Server deployment and originally with our online site when we switched, we basically use PowerShell and tab command and script the automation so that it generates a CSV file that is then imported to import those users. One of the cool new features that we started using in our Tableau Online site, it uses the SCIM Open API standard. Anyone familiar with SCIM? It's relatively new. Basically what SCIM allows you to do is keep your downstream applications that from your identity provider in sync with your user store. So if a user is provisioned in your identity provider, like OneLogin, for example, a secure transaction is sent to your Tableau Online site and a user account is created there. This is great because then when an employee leaves the company and their account is deactivated in the identity provider, it then unlicenses the account in Tableau Online. So it's all automated and there's no special scripting that you have to do. Any questions about authentication and provisioning? All right. Now I'm going to dive into talking about Tableau Bridge. Tableau Bridge essentially allows you to connect to your on-premises data from Tableau Online. There's no special configuration, or you don't need to poke a hole through your firewall. It sends it securely using WebSockets protocol. When someone opens a viz in Tableau Online that connects to this published to this internal data source, the Bridge client essentially queries the database for you and then sends the results back up to Tableau Online. It's more accurate actually to say behind the firewall than on premises, because you may have databases that exist in AWS, for example, but they might be in a VPC. So essentially acting as an extension of your data center. So the best way to think about it is Bridge allows you to connect to databases that resolve to an internal IP address rather than an externally public available IP address. Tableau Bridge is very easy to install and download. There's no separate license key required. It used to be packaged with desktop, and then starting in 2018.2, it became its own separate installer. And you can just download it straight from our website and install it, and it takes about 30 seconds. It's also packaged with the same drivers that are packaged with Tableau Desktop. So one of the caveats of using Tableau Bridge is that you have to use published data sources, as it uses our Tableau Data Server feature. As you may have seen during the conference, there's more and more features that are starting to use published data sources. So you can kind of see how the direction the product's going. Let me tell you about one of the big problems we had when we first started using Tableau Online. So, and this is the deployment that our developers use for tracking test automation results, defect workflow tracking. And so we have this on-premises database that stores these automation test results. And it's a big, huge database that has a bunch of different tables, and users would connect to the database, build their dashboard, and then just publish. Well, what happened is that they'd never change the default name they would never change the default name of the data source when they published. And so we ended up with hundreds of data sources with the same or similar name. We had users overriding data sources, breaking other people's workbooks because the metadata was different, and it was a big mess. So one of the best practices, if you're connecting to on-prem data with Bridge, is to develop a naming source convention for your data sources. Have data stewards provide good descriptions for the data sources. We have a certification feature, which essentially allows you to highlight data sources that may be the source of truth or provide the best way to get users the data that they need. This also helps power our recommendations feature, which is here on the right. So essentially the way it works is when you first connect to a database and you drag out a table, an analyst has automatically suggested data sources that may already have what they need. So they don't need to build a data source from scratch. They can just click the green button, it connects to that data source, and they're on their way building their viz. The other advantage of published data sources is that users can build visualizations right in the web browser without even needing Tableau Desktop. So Desktop also has this cool feature where if you have a workbook and you have built your data source from scratch, you can publish the workbook and the data source at the same time, even if you have multiple data sources in the workbook. Down here below, you can see how you can choose to publish the data source separately. What happens behind the scenes is the data source is published, it replaces the published data source with replaces the embedded data source with the published data source, and then publishes the workbook all in one action. And you can, if you have multiple data sources, you would see multiple options all in that same box. If you have some cloud data sources that the workbook uses, you can keep those embedded and then only publish the ones that are connecting to on-prem data. So once a extract data source is published, then you go to schedule the refreshes. Extract refresh scheduling with Bridge is very ad hoc and flexible. You can set up frequency. You can refresh data sources as frequently as every 15 minutes. We support multiple schedules, full and incremental. So a common practice is to have your incremental extract run during the business day when things are busy, and then do a full extract at night. The database credentials are stored in the Bridge client itself, and this is for security reasons. That way the database credentials are not transmitted over the wire. And if a data source needs to be refreshed on demand, that can be done from the Bridge client itself. If a data source is published and an analyst forgets to switch it to tell it to use Bridge, they can automatically switch it in the browser without having to republish the data source. There's a button in the Tableau Online UI where you select whether you want to refresh an online or on your Bridge client, and that's what this computer on my network is. And it has a link to how you can install Bridge. And then this also shows where you enter your database credentials for refreshing the data source. So one of the things we did at Tableau is we set up centrally managed Bridge clients. Since the majority of our data is on-prem, we need to have a lot of Bridge clients. And so we have multiple admins that are managing these Bridge clients. And so if someone's out of town, someone's out of the office, we set them all up under one service account. There's a couple benefits to this. One of the main databases that we use in our online deployment is a SQL Server, and we're just using Windows Authentication or SSPI. So there's no entering database credentials. And so setting them up under a shared account allows multiple people to manage them if necessary. Users can also set up their own extract refresh client. Users can also set up their own Bridge clients to refresh their extracts. This might be necessary if an analyst can't share the database credentials with you. It might not be the most ideal if you're in an organization where you have laptops instead of desktops, and so they're not always connected and they need to be frequently refreshed. But if there's just like a once a daily thing, then it's really easy for users to set up their own Bridge clients. And then as a site admin, you choose which Bridge clients serve live queries. And that's shown on this next page here. Right now we have 5 Bridge clients that are serving live queries, and then a couple clients serving or refreshing extracts. It's probably a bit overkill. We probably don't need that many, but we just do it because we can. Okay. Any questions about Tableau Bridge and connecting to on-prem data? Yeah.
So for like row level security or initial SQL or impersonation, user credentials or UID, does that all work the same?
For the most part, yeah. Essentially, since it's all using published data sources, most of those, I think there is a known issue with initial SQL with certain database types that they're working on fixing. I don't remember off the top of my head, but for the most part, all that does work the same, just as if you were using published data sources in Tableau Server.
What about encrypted connections?
So,
Would it be encrypted from online to on-prem, or how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. So what Tableau Bridge uses, it uses WebSockets protocol, and so that's all encrypted with SSL.
It has to be?
I mean, it is by default. So like when you open when you sign into Tableau Bridge, you're essentially just using your online credentials.
Yep.
And that's the benefit of setting up, I mentioned earlier about setting up a Tableau ID account. We use one that's just like a Tableau ID admin account that doesn't use our identity provider because service accounts in our organization don't get provisioned to our identity provider because it uses a license and it costs money, and also for security reasons. And so we actually have to use a Tableau ID account for our bridge clients. And another good reason to have that is in case you get locked out of, or in case you have a problem with your identity provider, you might accidentally get locked out of your site. So we just set up one Tableau ID account with a really strong password that we just store in KeyPass, and that way multiple people can still manage the clients if they need to. Yeah?
Does Bridge, is it Windows only?
Right now it's only Windows, yeah. I'm not sure on the roadmap whether there's going to be support for Linux or Mac, but yeah, right now it's just Windows.
But in terms of specifications on that server, does it impact any performance?
Yeah, great question. It really doesn't. So you can only install one bridge client on a machine. So we install them on just little 4-core machines. You could probably easily get away with 2. It really depends on your workload and how much live queries versus extracts you're doing. Our bridge clients that are refreshing extracts, we scale them up to 8 cores just because Hyper loves cores and memory. So it just keeps extracts super speedy. But for live queries, 4 cores is probably overkill.
Is there a limit on like the concurrent extracts that it could be running on like one bridge client?
So a bridge client only refreshes one extract at a time. In our organization, it seems to work pretty good just to have 2 clients because none of the data that our dev team uses needs to be up to the minute refreshed. Like if an extract runs a little long, then the next one that's scheduled will just start right after it. So yes, it's run serially. Yeah.
Tableau Server, you have the concept of backgrounders. You have 10 backgrounders, you can have 40 jobs in the queue. You process 10 at a time or something along those lines. You're saying with Tableau Bridge, the equivalent is one bridge. If I dialed up 10 backgrounders, I want 10 bridges.
Essentially, yeah.
They can only run one per server, so I need 10 servers instead of 10 backgrounders on one server.
Yeah, if you need to run that many extract jobs at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
So back to basics of Tableau Bridge. Well, if you didn't have Tableau Bridge and you were going to make a connection from online to prem,
Mm-hmm.
what would you use then? Like, is this a supplement or is this you have to use this?
This is the only way that you can have Tableau Online connect to your on-premises data.
Okay.
Yeah, yep,
Okay,
yep. Yeah. About incremental refreshes? Yeah, so in Tableau, there's this concept of full extract refresh versus incremental extract refresh. And when you create the extract, you choose which column that you want to increment off of. The one drawback of incremental extracts is that it doesn't account for updated rows. So if you have rows in the table that are updated, but they were already added to the extract previously, then those aren't updated. And that's where the benefit of having both full and incremental comes in, because then you have the full refresh, then it refreshes the whole table again. Does that make sense? Sure.
So what are the pros and cons of moving in there, Tableau environment on-prem through Tableau Cloud and doing with this on Tableau and on-prem database?
Yeah, the biggest benefit is that you don't have to manage your own hardware, right? Tableau Online is a fully hosted SaaS service, and so you don't have to buy and manage your own servers. The only hardware you would need would be for the bridge clients themselves. Does that make sense?
We host our database also in the Tableau Cloud. Do we need this Tableau Bridge?
No, and I'm about to get to that. Yeah. Yep. Sure.
In the healthcare industry, we have some other regulations like patient's data and all that. We can't really put that in the public cloud. Is there like a, private cloud option in Tableau Online, or is it secure and certified for that?
That's a good question. We get a lot of, I'm not an expert in that area on Tableau Online with the HIPAA regulations. I talk a little bit about that later on with Tableau Server in public cloud. I believe we meet most regulations, but I'm not an expert on it. But I can get you in touch with some people that are.
There was an announcement yesterday that AWS and Tableau have departed.
Right. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Yep.
Server encryption just came out on Tableau Online.
Yes. Well, Tableau Online actually, we already encrypt extracts at rest.
Okay.
Yeah. The feature that was announced today was specific for Tableau Server. Our online is structured a little different in how we store extracts and files, just because we have multiple customers' data, and so we actually already do that today.
I see what they do.
Yep. Yeah.
Anything on the roadmap to work with like third-party schedulers, like anything like a vendor?
That's a great question. The question was, is there anything on the roadmap to work with third-party schedulers? There's no specific features on the roadmap that I'm aware of, but you could easily do some scripting with tab command. There's another session on Bridge, I think is tomorrow. I'll double check it. I'll let you know after class. I can put you in touch with our project manager.
But essentially what you're saying is the tab command can script a lot of what we're doing there, as long as you have the client.
So let me think about that. So tab command can actually schedule refreshes for cloud data. I don't think at the moment tab command can actually refresh Bridge extracts now that I think about it, because everything is done at the client rather than through Tableau Online. So like you have to refresh the extract on demand from the client itself. But we can ask the product manager later today if they have anything inside. That's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Not a question, but I just want to mention that Dave Breed, the
Yeah.
member from the dev team for Tableau Bridge, he's doing a deep dive and doing today on Tableau.
Yeah, that,
If you want
yeah.
to get into that, I recommend checking out this session.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Yep.
Tableau Bridge, how does it do it? Is it noon today?
Yeah. Yep, at noon. All right, now I'm going to talk about connecting to cloud data. Whoop. So one of the keys with connecting to cloud data from Tableau Online is to whitelist the Tableau Online IP addresses with your data provider. These IP addresses are listed in our online help, and they don't change, and essentially allows connectivity from Tableau Online to your cloud database or database service. Both live connections and extracts are supported, and we support most cloud database services, even those that use OAuth connections like Google BigQuery and Google Analytics. We also have the dashboard starters feature that was mentioned earlier today on Devs on Stage. They were talking about the LinkedIn dashboard starters. We also have starters that are already available for cloud-based services such as ServiceNow and Salesforce and Marketo. And these are really cool because they're designed to already work with the data, with how the data is stored in these services. And so it gives you a quick way to build dashboards directly from the web browser. So when you schedule refreshes in Tableau Online, it's very similar to scheduling refreshes in Tableau Server. The one drawback is that you don't get to customize the schedules. The schedules are already predefined since they're using Tableau Online resources to refresh everyone's extracts. And so we enforce 2-hour job timeout limit. This is the default timeout limit in Tableau Server as well. So ways to mitigate that is use incremental refresh like I talked about earlier. Hiding unused fields saves a lot of time as well, because if you're not using the field, reducing the number of columns has a more significant impact on your extract refresh time than rows in a lot of cases. And then extract filters are also a great way to limit jobs as well.
Can that be extended upon request at all?
That's a great question. I don't think so at this time. I think there are some features on the roadmap to have self-service schedules similar to, so in Tableau Online, like with subscriptions, for example, users can set their own subscription time on the fly, just like I talked about with bridge scheduling. And they may eventually implement that for extract refreshes as well. I'm just not sure where it is on the roadmap yet. So when refreshing cloud data sources, you can use the admin views to check the status. It shows you jobs that are in progress, jobs that have failed, error details. And one thing I forgot to mention with Bridge, and the same case here, is that if a job fails, the data source owner is the one that is notified via email. The admin view is useful for troubleshooting when data sources are not up to date, and you can see what the error was or why they failed. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any way to tell how much drain this extracts are on the server compared to the user load?
And you mean in Tableau Server?
Yeah.
That's a great question. So what we like to do with Tableau Server is in our internal deployment, we isolate all the backgrounders so that they're on one node instead. And this gets into the next section a little bit, but in Tableau Online, it's not really applicable. We actually do the same thing in Tableau Online as well. All of our backgrounders are on separate machines from the ones that, versus the nodes that are used to load the visualizations don't have any backgrounders on them. So the workloads are separated. So because when an extract is refreshed by backgrounder, it writes the extract to the file store, and then later on, a different node will pick up that extract to read it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
So these admin views are only accessible to admins. I'm the data source owner. I'm the person that's going to get notified when it fails. How do I tell if it's running or what the history of failure?
Yeah, that's another great question. There's some upcoming features for Tableau Online and Tableau Server that my colleague is working on that are essentially going to be published admin data sources. And you'll be able to build visualizations yourself off of these published data sources so that everyone can see. There's also another trick with Tableau Server where you can actually take the admin views and republish them for all users. But currently that's not available for Tableau Online. Any other questions about connecting to cloud data, refreshing extracts, live connections? Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about considerations you may need for Tableau Server, where Tableau Online may not necessarily work in your organization. So we have two main deployments of Tableau in our org. One's still on Tableau Server and the other one's in Tableau Online. And our main Tableau Server deployment is still on-prem right now because we have a ton of extracts that are refreshing concurrently. And there are features on the roadmap to make bridge refresh extracts more centralized, but still a ways out. So that's one of the primary blockers from us migrating our main system to Tableau Online. the same time, we're also migrating one of our main analytics databases to the cloud as well. So as we move data to the cloud, we're going to move content to Tableau Online. And if you also have workbooks that are using embedded data sources, and there are complications from switching to published data sources, that may be where you still need to use Tableau Server. There might be control or compliance reasons why you still need to use Tableau Server, such as industry-specific regulations or for auditing reasons. You may also want to use the guest user in scenarios where you have a small number of creators, but a large number of viewers for embedded visits, for example, in websites. You can embed visits with Tableau Online as well, but it still requires a license to be able to view those embedded visits. So if you have a viz embedded in a web page and the user visits the web page, they're presented with a dialog to sign into Tableau Online. Or if you're using an identity provider like with SAML, you just click the button and it signs them in. But there are some drawbacks with using Tableau Server. You have to have multiple environments. We have a QA environment that we use for testing upgrades, and we have it pretty similar scale to our production environment, just so we can test workloads and performance and between different versions. We also have a failover environment where to minimize downtime. So during an upgrade, for example, we switch our traffic using an F5 load balancer to our failover instance, so that users still can access their visualizations when we do upgrades. We have a backup and restore. We back up from production and then restore to this failover instance nightly. And it's all automated with scripts using Python for the most part. Using Tableau Server also makes Tableau Mobile access a little more complex because users will have to have VPN to access Tableau Server most likely on their mobile device. So you may have to set up mobile device management in order to be able to access Tableau Server. Obviously, none of that's necessary if you have Tableau Online, because Tableau Online is accessible from anywhere. Obviously, there's some caveats there if you're using an identity provider, depending on the identity provider. But most identity providers are cloud-based, so in most situations, users can access the Tableau Online site from anywhere without signing into the VPN. Tableau Server is now fully supported on Linux. One thing I'll tell you is that Linux is probably actually preferable now. Our new Tableau Services Manager, which you've heard about during the conference that we released last year, is actually developed on Linux. We support CentOS, Red Hat, Enterprise Linux, Ubuntu distributions. We noticed when we switched from Windows to Linux on Tableau Server, we noticed a slight improvement in performance. I think it's just because there's less overhead. But of course, we do still support Windows, but if you're deploying to a public cloud, Linux may be the preferable choice just because it's a lot cheaper if you don't have as many licensing costs. Obviously, we still support Tableau Server on on-premises hardware, and we support Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, and Azure for deploying in the public cloud. And also, as mentioned yesterday, we have various AMIs that are available in Amazon Web Services, including a new one for healthcare specifically that you mentioned earlier. So here's kind of a comparison summary of the functional differences between Tableau Online and Tableau Server. Authentication with Tableau Server, you can obviously sync with Active Directory or LDAP. Tableau Online, you don't have that option, but if you have an identity provider, it makes it pretty painless. Provisioning users involves creating a CSV file and importing it in tab command, or using the new SCIM standard. I forgot to mention, SCIM is currently supported with one login, and it's in beta for Okta. And more IDPs will be supported over time. I have a feeling that this is kind of the new direction that SaaS services are going to be going when keeping on-prem data stores in sync with your SaaS applications. With Bridge, you have to use published data sources. With Cloud Data, you don't, or Tableau Server, it's not necessarily a requirement. And the benefits of Tableau Online, obviously, is that it's fully hosted, except for the Bridge clients. And versus Tableau Server, you need your own hardware. So that's kind of the summary of the functional differences. And I'll go ahead and open up to any other questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to confirm there, another thing.
Yeah.
I got a workbook, it points to a data source, it's got the embedded credentials, connection information, all embedded inside my workbook. I can't use Tableau Online for that. I would have to take all those embedded credentials, that connection information, convert it, put it to a hosted data source, a published data source, and my workbook would point to that.
Right, so you publish your data source with the embedded credentials. And so you're talking about it like a live scenario, live connection?
Either way, I know in our shop in particular, a lot of customers tend to put the connections right in the workbook, so they refresh the workbook versus
Right.
finding hosted data sources and refreshing hosted data sources.
Right, yeah. So with on-prem data specifically, you have to use Bridge and you have to use published data sources currently. There's talks about potentially supporting embedded connections in the future with Bridge, but that's kind of a ways out on the roadmap as far as I'm aware. Yeah, in a live scenario, and that's where the feature I talked about earlier is really helpful, is that if a user accidentally publishes, or if there's already an existing workbook that has embedded data sources, you can just download it, open it in desktop, and when you go to republish it, choose publish data source separately. And then that publishes the data source and replaces in the workbook all in one action. So switching it isn't too terrible. Yeah, go ahead.
So what will happen to all of the existing name user licenses of desktop and server when you move that on?
What will happen to all the name user licenses?
Licenses of those.
That's a great question. I'm actually not a big licensing expert, but the way that things are going with the subscription model is that users will, I think what's going to happen is that rather than licensing different products, users are going to be licensed instead at the subscription level. So.
I understand, but what will happen to our existing 100 licenses that we have for the desktop and server?
I'm not actually sure. I don't know how I don't know how things work on the sales side when you convert from your named user license to the subscription service.
I spoke sales.
Oh, yeah.
There's a migration path, so you can use your existing licenses, migrate them to the new environment, and do a confirmation to sure that you know what the cost for it. So, but typically, there is no loss for it.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So to repeat what you just said, there's a migration path for converting your name licenses to subscription model, and so you don't lose any cost there.
And to add to that, not only is there a migration path, there are incentives currently, make it a little less painful to get over there, and they motivate you to move sooner rather than later.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, this is something that's not in my area. I don't have to worry about about licenses. Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we've been using server, Tableau Server. We're looking at migrating to AWS.
Uh-huh.
And we've been testing it out, and we haven't been using Tableau Online. Is Bridge required for what we're doing by switching to AWS? Keeping it within our firewall?
No. So in your scenario, you're talking about moving Tableau Server to AWS hardware. If your AWS hardware is going to be in your VPC, so like if it's going to be an extension of your data center, then No, Tableau Bridge is not necessary. You'll still be able to connect all as if it's in your data center itself. If you decide to deploy it to hardware that is not in a VPC, that is publicly available, but you have like whitelisting, then you just have to whitelist in the AWS side what can connect to your on-prem databases. Yeah, Bridge is strictly just for Tableau Online. Does that make sense? Okay, great.
So what will happen, Tableau Online and on-prem databases when you guys do an upgrade?
Mm-hmm.
So what will happen to our data dashboards and to our database structures? How you guys make it sync? How we can test it? How we just plan?
That's a good question. So Tableau Online is upgraded with no downtime at all. But one thing to keep in mind is that your workbooks don't get upgraded to the new format. Like your existing workbooks, like just recently, you have workbooks that are 2018.2 format. When we upgraded online to 2018.3 last week, your content's still 2018.2. Right? It doesn't change to 2018.3 until you republish it with Tableau Desktop 2018.3. Does that make sense? Okay. Good.
So understanding security, we're currently using Active Directory. Basically, it's dumping member lists, and then you create them in Tableau Online as local groups, local users.
Yep, that's correct. Yep, and there's a bunch of resources out there. In fact, I think we might even have some that from my colleague that has like some Python scripts and that you can use PowerShell or Tab Command to simplify this process. Go ahead.
Is it possible to still connect to Postgres to do custom admin views?
Yeah, it's a great question. So with Tableau Online, it's not currently able to do that, but there are features on the roadmap that are coming very soon that my colleague Matt is actually working on that are custom admin data sources, or I shouldn't say, they're admin data sources that allow you to build custom views off of those data sources. The tricky part is that in Tableau Online, obviously, the repository has all customers' information, right? Versus Tableau Server, it's just your own info. So if you move to Tableau Online, pretty soon you'll have data sources that will just show up in your Tableau Online site, and you can just connect to those published data sources, and that accesses all of your repository information that you need. So then you can build your own admin views as you want, and then share them with others. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah, go ahead. No, it's all good.
So Joe at myjob.com publishes a dashboard. Joe leaves the company. Normally as a Tableau server admin, I get an email back from Postmaster saying, hey, couldn't send something to Joe. I then take that and I go to, I know who the site contacts are and say, hey, who's taking over for Joe? Here's emails you might want to know their data source is done. Who gets those emails in Tableau Online? Postmaster bounces.
That's a good question. So in that case,
I'm going to say you do.
yeah, we probably do. Yeah, we probably get the errors saying that the email gets bounced back. I know for like subscriptions, for example, in Tableau Online, there's a separate admin view that shows subscription notifications. So if subscriptions fail, it shows that error saying could not contact Joe for this email. I guess those errors aren't really exposed for extract alerts currently. But the solution to that is once you know that person has left, one common workflow would be to, assuming the user becomes unlicensed in Tableau Online, then you look at the content that they own, and then you can reassign it to other owners. There's no need to have them republish it or anything. You can just change the owner.
Are you sure about that? Because changing ownership typically wipes out the metadata for connectivity information.
If there's embedded credentials, you're correct. Yeah, so the new owner would need to know the database credentials.
So you could define that. You could say, oh, Joe's got
That's correct, yeah. And that's for security reasons, because the data source owner needs to know the database credentials, right? So it just prevents, we do that on purpose because there could be a case where the new owner doesn't necessarily have rights to that database, so, yep.
Normally what we do is we get those, and then we change that person's email address to the site owner, and then we tell the site owner, Joe's gone, Mary, I redirected all of his alerts to your email. You change ownership when you're ready. The problem is.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Those postmasters,
Yeah,
I'm never gonna know that.
right. Well, and
And then notify me when somebody's changed their.
yeah, and in Tableau Online, you can't change an email address because the username is an email address. Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there any version compatibility issues? If you've got Tableau Server and desktop online and using them all at the same time, you have all the same version?
No, not necessarily. There's more and more features that are being released that allow for downgrading workbooks on the fly. So like if you have a workbook in a 2018.3 server and need to publish it to, or if you have a workbook in 2018.3 online, for example, and you need to publish it to 2018.2 server, there's a couple ways to do it. You can download as a older version. You can also, if you're using desktop 2018.3 and you're trying to publish to a 2018.2 server, it brings up a warning that says, hey, just to let you know, this is an older version. We have to downgrade your workbook before we republish it. Same scenario. Yep. Yeah, they're making backwards compatibility a lot easier in these more recent versions.
I have a
Yeah.
question related to site migration between Tableau Online to Tableau Server.
Uh-huh.
What we noticed is Tableau Online upgrade a couple of weeks before Tableau Server releases.
Yeah.
That creates a problem. Like when we ask Tableau Online support to create a site export,
Right.
we get a 28.3 version.
Yeah.
And 28.3 is not available for public to download. Then we have to wait, and then we have to do multiple times.
Yeah. They try to release, they try to upgrade online and release on-prem as soon as possible, but sometimes there are last-minute issues that are found, and so they fix them in the on-prem product and then upgrade online at the same time. I know that sometimes that period's longer than desirable, but we're getting better at trying to minimize that time. There's also, down the road, we may start releasing more frequently, right? Instead of quarterly, we might start releasing, as soon as weekly. So they're trying to get that continuous deployment pipeline better for sure. Yep. Yeah, one more, go ahead.
How are those embedded credentials when you publish the data source to Tableau Online protected?
So they're all stored in the repository, the same way that they're stored in Tableau Server. That's all in encrypted hash. I think it's AES 256. I don't remember what exact protocol, but they're all encrypted using the data source owner's credentials, I believe. And so when you download a data source, or if you download a workbook, like if it's cloud data, for example, the credentials are never downloaded with the workbook. They always stay in Tableau Online until that data source or workbook is deleted. Does that make sense?
So,
Yeah, so like if a user has access to download a workbook that has embedded credentials, but they're not the data source owner, they'll still need to enter their own credentials when they open it in Tableau Desktop.
gotcha. Okay. And then it's my understanding currently that the data that's extracted to online is not encrypted.
No, we actually, extracts in Tableau Online that are published are actually already encrypted at rest.
Okay.
Yeah. Encryption at rest just is getting released for Tableau Server now. But we've already been encrypting data at rest in Tableau Online.
Okay.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I'll be around for questions, and if you're going to any other of the meetups, I'll be at the Linux meetup later this afternoon. I might be in with the Oh, yeah, here's related sessions. So as you mentioned, the Tableau Bridge session at noon today with Dave Reek. He does a deep dive into how Bridge works, so highly recommend that. And then also one of my colleagues talks more about how we do Tableau at Tableau, and that session is tomorrow afternoon. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.